Based on my experience, 4 out of 5 babies who have developed an aversion to feeding display a disjointed feeding pattern that I refer to as conflicted behaviour. When conflicted, a baby willingly accepts the nibble into his mouth, takes a few sucks, and then turns away or arches back in an agitated state. He might cry at that point. Within seconds, he returns to face the bottle, willingly accepts, takes a few more sucks, but once again becomes upset and pulls away. He could feed in this on-off feeding pattern throughout the entire feed, or until he becomes drowsy, at which time he might feed well. I refer to this as conflicted feeding behaviour because the baby swings between accepting and rejecting the parent's attempt to feed him. It can look like he's desperately hungry to feed, yet something's preventing him from eating. I find that this behaviour is often misinterpreted as pain or a sucking problem by parents and health professionals who are unaware that babies can develop an aversion to feeding, or who are unfamiliar with the behaviours displayed by a feeding-averse baby. Upon observing a baby's distress while feeding in this broken pattern, most people will understandably blame pain. However, in the case of a feeding aversion, the distress the baby experiences relates to fear of feeding and not pain. Of course, a baby could experience pain while feeding for various reasons and display very much the same broken feeding behaviour. You can tell the difference between pain and fear of feeding by observing how your baby responds once the feed is ended. Distress due to pain will linger long after the feed is ended, whereas a baby who is fearing feeding will calm quickly once he recognises the parents are no longer trying to feed him. Not all babies become distressed when displaying conflicted feeding behaviour. Some appear to be frustrated. In that case, conflicted behaviour can give the appearance that a baby is experiencing difficulties coordinating sucking and swallowing. You can tell the difference between a sucking problem and conflicted behaviour by your baby's feeding history. If he has a problem sucking, this will be obvious from the time he first started to bottle feed. Also, all feeds will be affected equally, including those taken in a drowsy state or asleep. Whereas the feeding-averse babies don't tend to show conflicted behaviour until between 8 and 12 weeks of age. At that time, conflicted behaviour affects only some, but not all feeds. How I interpret conflicted feeding behaviour is that past feeding experiences have taught a baby a number of different things. On one hand, he may have learned that sucking from a bottle will soothe pangs of hunger, and so the discomfort of hunger motivates him to accept the nibble into his mouth and suck. On the other hand, he may have also learned that something bad happens during feeds, and so when he does accept the bottle, he sucks very quickly and then pulls away to distance himself from the bottle. He does this in an attempt to avoid a repeat occurrence of the situation that's caused his fear. It's like he's trapped in an indecisive state, wavering between his need to feed and yet feeling fearful to do so. I can appreciate that the realization that your baby may have become fearful of feeding would be heartbreaking and hard for any loving parent to accept. However, it's important that you understand the reason for his frustration and distress at feeding times in order to find an effective solution. Mistakenly blaming pain or a sucking problem could lead you down the wrong path, one that could very likely complicate a feeding aversion further.